3 seconds. That's how close the room was to a bloodbath. The air in the private dining room was thick enough to choke on. The translator, a sweating kid in a cheap suit, was stuttering, butchering the dialect of a man who killed people for interruptions. Nobody at the table knew Italian well enough to save the deal. The Mafia boss, Alessandro Volpe, was losing patience. His hand was already inching toward the distinct bulge of a pistol beneath his tailored jacket. The deal was dead. The violence was inevitable. Then a voice cut through the tension. It wasn't the trembling waiter or the terrified translator. It was the waitress in the corner. And she didn't just speak. She commanded the room in a dialect so rare, so dangerous that every head snapped toward her. The Obsidian Room was the kind of restaurant where the menus didn't have prices and the shadows cost more than the rent in most Chicago apartments. It was neutral ground, or at least it was supposed to be. Alessandro Volpe sat at the head of the mahogany table. His posture relaxed, but his eyes dead cold. He was 32, the youngest capo in the city's history, and tonight he was trying to secure a shipping route with the Calabrian outfit, represented by Don Salvatore. Salvatore was an old-school brute. He had hands like shovels and a temper like a lit fuse. And right now he looked ready to explode. "Tell him," Salvatore barked in a thick, guttural Calabrian dialect, spitting a piece of cigar on the pristine floor, "that if he insults my family again with this offer, I will gut him like a fish." Alessandro looked at his translator, a kid named Peter, who had a degree from Yale but no street smarts. Peter was pale, wiping sweat from his upper lip. Peter stammered, looking at Alessandro. "He says he is considering the offer, Mr. Volpe. He just needs, clarification on the family aspect." Alessandro narrowed his eyes. He didn't speak Calabrian. His family was Sicilian, but he knew tone. He knew body language. And he knew when a man was being insulted. Salvatore wasn't considering anything. His hand was resting dangerously close to the steak knife. "Peter," Alessandro said, his voice dangerously low, "you're lying to me." What did he actually say? It's a difficult dialect, sir. Very rural," Peter squeaked. Salvatore slammed his fist on the table. The crystal glasses jumped. He shouted something else faster this time, his face turning purple. His bodyguards behind him shifted jackets opening just enough to reveal the glint of steel. Alessandro's own men, Rocco and Silas, tensed up hands hovering near their waistbands. The air left the room. It was over. The deal was botched. Alessandro sighed, resigning himself to the mess. He would have to shoot his way out of a 5-star restaurant. He reached into his jacket. "He said your offer is an insult to his bloodline." A female voice rang out. Clear, sharp, unafraid. The silence that followed was deafening. Alessandro froze. He turned his head slowly toward the shadows near the service station. A waitress stood there. She held a silver water pitcher in one hand. She couldn't have been more than 24, with dark hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and a uniform that was 2 sizes too big. Salvatore looked at her, stunned. She stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the Calabrian Don. "He said," she continued, looking directly at Salvatore, switching seamlessly into flawless rapid-fire Calabrian. "The Wolf of Chicago does not offer insults, Don Salvatore. He offers a partnership, but if you prefer to be a small king of a dying hill, that is your choice. Just do not mistake patience for weakness." Salvatore's mouth hung open. The dialect she used wasn't just Calabrian. It was Arborescia, an ancient specific dialect used in the mountain villages of southern Italy. It was a language of the old families, a language of secrets. The Don sat back slowly, the rage draining from his face replaced by a confused respect. He looked at Alessandro, then back at the waitress. "Who is this?" Salvatore grunted in broken English. Alessandro didn't look at Salvatore. He was staring at the girl. She was trembling slightly just in the hands, but her chin was high. "My personal consultant," Alessandro lied smoothly, never taking his eyes off her. "Peter, get out. You're fired." Peter scrambled out of the room like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Alessandro gestured to the empty chair next to him. "Sit," he commanded the waitress. "I have tables to serve, sir," she said, her voice dropping back to a flat American accent. "Not anymore." Alessandro's gaze was heavy, terrifying. "Sit. Finish the deal, or we all die in here tonight." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then set the water pitcher down on the linen tablecloth with a soft clink. She sat. For the next hour, the waitress whose name tag read Bella negotiated a multi-million-dollar shipping contract. She navigated the complex cultural insults, smoothed over the aggression, and spun Alessandro's hardline demands into poetry that stroked the old Don's ego. When the papers were signed, Salvatore stood up, kissed Bella's hand, and left with his men. The door clicked shut. The room was silent again. Alessandro poured 2 glasses of the 1982 Brunello. He slid one toward her. "Drink," he said. "I don't drink on the job," she replied, staring at the exit. "Who are you?" Alessandro asked, leaning forward. "Just a waitress who studied abroad, Mr. Volpe." Alessandro laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. "No. You can learn Italian in a classroom. You can learn slang on the street, but Arbarace is spoken with the cadence of a frantic mother protecting her children. That isn't learned. That is inherited." He stood up and walked around the table, boxing her in. "Who are you really, Bella? Because nobody finds themselves working the dinner shift at the Obsidian Room with a linguistic skill set worth $10 million. Bella stood up. She was tall, but he towered over her. "My name is Irene Corvez. I'm from Ohio. I'm just trying to pay my rent." "Liar," Alessandro whispered. He reached out his fingers, grazing her chin, tilting her face up to the light. He was looking for something, a scar, a recognition. "Your eyes. I've seen them before." "You're mistaken," she said, pulling away. "Can I go now?" "You can go," Alessandro said, checking his watch. "But Rocco is going to Druvio, and tomorrow you don't come here. You come to my office at the chaotic center of the financial district, 9:00 a.m. And if I don't, then I'll assume you're a spy for the Russians or the Feds, and I'll have Rocco find you. And Rocco, he doesn't have my patience." Irene swallowed hard. She turned and walked out of the room. As soon as she hit the kitchen, her composure shattered. She leaned against the stainless steel counter, hyperventilating. She had slipped. She had stayed hidden for 5 years, a ghost in the system. And in one moment of stupidity, to save a room full of murderers, she had exposed herself to the most dangerous one of them all. Irene didn't sleep. Her apartment was a studio in the run-down part of the South Side, filled with books and a go bag she kept packed under the floorboards. She sat on her bed, staring at the bag. She should run. She could be in Wisconsin by sunrise, change her name again, dye her hair blonde. But Alessandro Volpe wasn't a local thug. He had reach. If she ran now, after showing her face and her skill, He would hunt her down just to satisfy his curiosity. The only place to hide was in plain sight. She showed up at Volpe Enterprises at 8:55 a.m. The building was a fortress of glass and steel. She was ushered up to the top floor, the penthouse office that overlooked the city like a god watching an ant farm. Alessandro was standing by the window wearing a grey suit that cost more than her life's earnings. He didn't turn around when she entered. "I ran a background check on Irene Corvese from Ohio," he said, his voice reflecting off the glass. "Born 1998. Parents deceased in a car accident. High school valedictorian. No college record." He turned around holding a folder. He tossed it onto his massive desk. "It's a very good forgery. Expensive. State-level quality. But here is the problem, Bella. The real Irene Corvese died of leukemia when she was 6 years old." Irene stood perfectly still. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she forced her face to remain blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." Alessandro walked toward her, closing the distance. "I think you do. I think you're running from something, or someone." He stopped inches from her. He smelled of sandalwood and gun oil. "I have a proposition. I have enemies. Too many. And my business is expanding into territories where English is useless and trust is non-existent. I need a voice that understands the old laws." "You want me to be your translator?" she said. "I want you to be my shadow," he corrected. "You live in my secure compound. You travel with me. You speak for me. In exchange, I give you protection. Whatever you are running from, it cannot touch you if you are with me." Irene looked into his eyes. They were dark, intelligent, and predatory. But he was right. The people hunting her, the corrupt faction of the DEA that killed her father, were getting close. Alessandro Volpe might be a monster, but he was a monster who owned the city. "I have conditions," she said quietly. Alessandro raised an eyebrow. "You are in no position to negotiate, little ghost, but amuse me. I don't carry a weapon. I don't participate in torture. And if I want to leave, I leave, no questions asked." Alessandro smirked. It was a wolfish grin. "Agreed. Except for the last part. You leave when I say you're done." He extended his hand. "Welcome to the family, Irene." She shook it. His grip was iron. The first 2 weeks were a blur of luxury and terror. Irene, now living in a guest suite in Alessandro's heavily guarded penthouse, saw a side of the world few survived. She translated during tense sit-downs in back rooms of butcher shops and during high-stakes wire transfers in Swiss banks. She learned that Alessandro was different. He was ruthless, yes, but he wasn't cruel without cause. He was a strategist, and he was surrounded by snakes. The twist came on a rainy Tuesday in November. Irene was in the library of the penthouse organizing Alessandro's files. She spoke fib languages, and Alessandro had her translating his grandfather's old journals from Sicily. She found a loose floorboard near the bookshelf. It wasn't accidental. It was a hidden compartment. Inside was a single yellowed photograph and a stack of letters. She picked up the photo. It showed 2 men, arms around each other, laughing on a vineyard in Palermo. One was Alessandro's father, widely known as the Old Wolf. The other man was her father. Irene dropped the photo. Her breath hitched. Her father Marco had been a simple accountant. That's what he had told her. He had been killed in a robbery gone wrong 5 years ago. She opened the letters. They were written in code, but she broke it easily. Marco, the DEA is pressing me. I have to give them a name. I'm sorry, brother. I have to give them you. The letter was signed by Alessandro's father. Irene's blood turned to ice. It wasn't the DEA who destroyed her family. It was the Volpes. Alessandro's family had framed her father, sold him out to corrupt agents to save their own skin. She was sleeping under the roof of the people who made her an orphan. The door handle turned. Irene shoved the photo and letters into her blouse just as Alessandro walked in. He looked tired. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. "We have a problem," Alessandro said, rubbing his temples. "My capo in New York, Stefano. He's here, and he's demanding a meeting tonight." Irene forced a smile, her hand trembling over her chest, where the letter burned against her skin. "Why is that a problem?" "Because," Alessandro said, looking at her with a vulnerability she had never seen before, "Stefano is the one who killed my father. He doesn't know I know, and tonight I'm going to kill him." He paused. "I need you there, Bella." Stefano speaks a dialect of Venetian slang that is impossible to track. If he gives an order to his men to ambush me, I need to know before the bullets fly. Can you do that? Irene looked at him. This was her chance. She could let Stefano kill him. She could let the Volpe line end tonight. It would be justice. "Yes," she said, her voice hollow. "I can do that." The meeting took place at the docks, a warehouse district converted into a trendy nightclub owned by the family. The bass of the music thumped against the floorboards, vibrating up through Irene's heels. They were in the VIP loft behind soundproof glass. Stefano was a snake of a man, thin, wearing a suit that was too loud with eyes that darted around the room. He had 4 men with him. Alessandro had only Rocco and Irene. "Alessandro!" Stefano shouted, spreading his arms. "The King of Chicago! You look tired." "Heavy is the head, Stefano," Alessandro replied dryly. He gestured for Irene to sit next to him. Stefano's eyes lingered on Irene. "Who is the pretty thing, a new pet? My ears," Alessandro said. "Proceed." The meeting began. It was a negotiation about territory lines in New Jersey. Boring, standard business. But Irene was listening to the whispers. Stefano's men were murmuring to each other in a low, rapid Venetian dialect, barely moving their lips. 10:05, one guard whispered to the other. "When the bass drops on the next track, the back door is open." Irene checked her watch. 10:03. She looked at Alessandro. He was focused on Stefano arguing about percentages. He didn't know. He was 2 minutes away from execution. Justice. That's what the letter in her shirt demanded. Let him die. Let the Volpe family burn. But then she looked at Alessandro's hands. They weren't on his weapon. He was pouring a drink. He trusted her. For the first time in his life, the wolf trusted someone, and it was her. 10:04. Stefano smiled. It was a predatory, winning smile. "I think we have a deal, Alessandro. Let us toast." Stefano reached for his glass. His men shifted their weight. Irene made her choice. She didn't speak. She didn't warn him. She acted. She grabbed the heavy crystal whiskey bottle from the table and smashed it across the face of the guard nearest to her. The room exploded into chaos. "Get down!" Irene screamed, tackling Alessandro off his chair, just as bullets shredded the leather where his head had been. Alessandro hit the floor confused, but instantly reacting. He drew his gun, firing blindly over the overturned table. Rocco was already down, taking a bullet to the shoulder. "They're coming from the back door," Irene shouted, crawling through the shattered glass. Venetian dialect, they said the back door. Alessandro looked at her, shock warring with adrenaline in his eyes. He realized she had saved him. Can you shoot? He yelled over the deafening roar of automatic fire. I hate guns, she yelled back. Learn to love them. He slid a spare pistol across the floor to her. Stefano had flipped the table and was screaming orders. The music was still thumping, creating a surreal, nightmarish soundtrack. Irene gripped the gun. Her father had taught her how to shoot cans in the backyard, back before the world went to hell. A gunman appeared at the loft railing. Irene didn't think. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil jarred her arm, but the man fell. Alessandro popped up, firing 2 precision shots that took down 2 more of Stefano's men. He grabbed Irene by the waist. We have to move. The fire escape. They sprinted toward the side exit bullets, chipping the concrete around them. They burst out into the cool Chicago night, the rain instantly soaking them. They scrambled down the metal stairs, jumping the last few feet into the alleyway. Alessandro's car was waiting, but the tires were slashed. Set up, Alessandro hissed. We're on foot. They ran for blocks, weaving through alleys, until they reached a safe house, a nondescript brownstone in a quiet neighborhood. Once inside, Alessandro locked the heavy steel door and engaged the security bolts. He slid down against the wall, breathing hard. Blood was seeping from a graze on his arm. Irene stood in the middle of the room, the gun still dangling from her hand. She was shaking violently. Alessandro looked up at her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the raw intensity of the moment. You saved me, he said, his voice rough. You could have let them kill me. Why didn't you? Irene dropped the gun. She reached into her soaked blouse and pulled out the crumpled, water-stained photograph and the letters. She threw them at his feet. Because I want the truth, she whispered, tears mixing with the rain on her face. Your father killed mine. Your family destroyed my life. I should have let you die. So tell me, Alessandro. Tell me why I shouldn't put a bullet in you right now. Alessandro stared at the photo. He recognized it instantly. He looked up at Irene, and the realization hit him like a physical blow. You're Marco's daughter, he said softly. Vittoria. My name is Vittoria, she spat, and I want to know why. Alessandro stood up, slowly wincing. My father was a ruthless man, Vittoria. He did many evil things. But he didn't kill your father. He stepped over the papers. Marco wasn't killed by the Volpes. He was the Volpe family's banker. He stole $10 million in bonds. My father didn't sell him out. My father helped him fake his death. Vittoria froze. That's a lie. Is it? Alessandro walked to a safe behind a painting. He spun the dial and pulled out a ledger. He flipped to a page and showed her. Transfer to Monsieur Rossi, alias, Zurich account. $10,000, $1,000. Status safe passage to Argentina. Your father is alive, Vittoria, Alessandro said. He left you behind. He took the money, and he ran. My father took the heat for the missing money to protect you because he knew if the other families found out, Marco stole it. They would torture his daughter to find him. Vittoria's world collapsed. The narrative she had built her survival on the noble father, the evil Mafia, crumbled into dust. She sank to her knees, sobbing. Alessandro knelt before her. He didn't touch her. He just watched, his expression unreadable. We are both orphans of men who loved money more than their blood, he said quietly. He reached out tentatively, touching her hand. Stefano knows you're with me now. He knows you speak the dialects. He saw you shoot his man. You are in the war now, Vittoria. You can hate me later. But tonight we have to survive." Vittoria looked up. The grief in her eyes was hardening into something else. Something colder. "Where is he?" she asked. "My father." "I can find him," Alessandro said. "But first we take back my city." The safe house wasn't a home. It was a concrete bunker disguised as a brownstone in the Pilsen district. The windows were bulletproof. The air was stale, and the only light came from the glow of Alessandro's laptop and the street lamps outside filtering through heavy blinds. For 2 days they were ghosts. Alessandro was bleeding money influence and actual blood. Stefano had moved fast. He had frozen the domestic accounts, bought off the police chief, and put a $5 million bounty on Alessandro's head. The Wolf of Chicago was cornered. Vittoria sat on the floor, surrounded by the journals she had saved from the penthouse. She wasn't crying anymore. The revelation about her father Marco had cauterized her grief. It burned it away, leaving a cold, sharp rage in its place. "The accounts in the Cayman Islands are locked," Alessandro said, slamming the laptop shut. He was pacing his shirt, unbuttoned the bandage on his arm, seeping red. "Stefano has the digital keys. Without liquid cash, I can't pay the soldiers. If I can't pay them, they defect. By tomorrow night, I'll be a general without an army." Vittoria looked up from a leather-bound journal dated 1974. "Not all the money is digital, Alessandro." He stopped pacing. "What? Your grandfather?" She tapped the page. "He didn't trust computers. He trusted words." She stood up and walked over to him. The tension between them had shifted. She wasn't his employee anymore. She was his lifeline. "Read this." She pointed to a passage written in a bizarre mix of Sicilian and Latin. Alessandro squinted. "It's gibberish. A shopping list for olive oil and lemons." "No." Vittoria shook her head. "It's a cipher. Specifically, it's a substitution cipher based on the prayer of St. Michael, but written in the dialect of Corleone pre-1950. Olive oil means gold bars. Lemons means uncut diamonds, and the location isn't a bank. It's a physical vault." Alessandro stared at her. "Where, under the frantic noise of the city," she translated, "beneath the bridge of the Twin Towers." Alessandro's eyes widened. "The Marina City Towers. My grandfather owned the parking structure foundation." "There is a vault there," Vittoria said confidently. "But the combination isn't numbers. It's a voice recognition phrase. A specific proverb spoken in the exact dialect of your grandfather's village. Stefano can't open it. His men can't open it. Only someone who knows the Arboresce inflection can unlock it." Alessandro grabbed his jacket. "We have to go, now." "It's suicide," Vittoria said. "Stefano will be watching your properties." "We don't go through the front," Alessandro said, checking the clip of his Sig Sauer. "We go through Lower Wacker Drive, the underground streets. But I need you, Vittoria. If you can't speak that phrase perfectly, the vault locks down forever." "Can you do it?" Vittoria thought of her father, living in luxury in Argentina, while she scrapped for tips in a diner. She thought of Stefano's men shooting at her. "I can speak it," she said. "But I want something in return." Alessandro paused at the door. "Name it." "When we win," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "I want the file on my father. I want to know exactly where he is." Done. The drive was a blur of shadows. Alessandro drove a beat-up sedan he kept in the garage for emergencies. They descended into the bowels of Chicago Lower Vaca Drive, a subterranean maze of concrete pillars and exhaust fumes where GPS signals went to die. They ditched the car near the river and moved on foot. The maintenance entrance to the Marina City Foundation was rusted shut. Alessandro kicked it open. They descended 3 flights of stairs into the damp darkness. Rats scurried away. Finally, they reached a massive steel door embedded in the bedrock. There was no keypad, just a dusty speaker grill. "Do it," Alessandro whispered, aiming his flashlight at the wall while keeping his gun trained on the stairs behind them. Vittoria stepped up to the mic. She closed her eyes. She had to channel the voice of an old man she had never met. She had to shape her vowels into the hard, rocky sounds of a Sicilian mountain village. "Lu sangu si lava cu lu sangu," she intoned perfectly. "Blood is washed by blood." There was a heavy mechanical clank. Gears ground together. The massive door groaned and swung open. Inside, stacked on pallets, were rows of gold bars and velvet bags. It was easily $50 million in untraceable wealth. Alessandro let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. "We're back in business." He reached for a bag of diamonds, but suddenly the silence of the tunnel was broken by a slow, sarcastic clap. Clap, clap, clap. Alessandro spun around, shielding Vittoria with his body. Stepping out from the shadows of the stairwell was Rocco, Alessandro's right-hand man, the man who had supposedly taken a bullet for him at the club. Rocco's arm was in a sling, but his gun hand was steady. Behind him stood 4 of Stefano's enforcers. "Rocco." Alessandro's voice was broken. "You. Stefano pays better, boss." Rocco shrugged. "And he promised me the north side. You were getting soft, listening to this Waitress." Rocco leveled his pistol at Alessandro's chest. "Thanks for opening the vault, though. Stefano couldn't figure out the dialect. We tracked your car. We knew you'd come for the reserves." Vittoria pressed her back against the cold gold bars. They were trapped, underground, outnumbered. "Any last words, boss?" Rocco sneered. Alessandro looked at Vittoria. He didn't look afraid. He looked apologetic. "Just one," Alessandro said. He looked at Vittoria. "Duck." Vittoria dropped instantly. Alessandro didn't shoot at Rocco. He shot at the fire suppression pipe running along the low ceiling directly above Rocco's head. The pipe burst. A high-pressure jet of chemical foam and rusty water blasted into Rocco's face, blinding him. "Move!" Alessandro roared. He grabbed a heavy bag of diamonds and hurled it into the face of the second gunman. Vittoria scrambled through the legs of the confused men. Alessandro grabbed her hand, and they sprinted deeper into the vault toward a secondary maintenance hatch he remembered from childhood. Bullets pinged off the gold bars, creating a symphony of ricochets. They burst through the hatch and tumbled out onto a grate overlooking the Chicago River. The water was 10 feet below, black and freezing. "Jump!" Alessandro yelled. They leaped. The icy water hit them like a hammer. The current swept them away into the darkness, leaving Rocco and his men cursing at the edge of the grate. They washed up near a service dock in Chinatown, shivering, soaked, and alive. Alessandro still had the bag of diamonds clutched in his hand. "We have capital." Alessandro chattered, his teeth clicking together. "We can buy an army now." They checked into a seedy motel under fake names, while Alessandro called in favors from the few loyalists he had left mercenaries who didn't care about politics. "Only payment," Vittoria dried her clothes on the radiator. "Stefano thinks we're dead," Alessandro said, hanging up the burner phone. or running. He's hosting a victory gala tomorrow night at the Lyric Opera House. He's going to announce the consolidation of the families. He's going to crown himself king. Vittoria looked at him. And we're going to crash the party. No, Alessandro said, walking over to her. He brushed a strand of damp hair from her face. His touch was electric. I'm going to crash the party. You are going to get on a bus to Iowa. Don't insult me, Vittoria said, slapping his hand away. You need me. Stefano is bringing in the Calabrians and the Russians. You saw the list. You don't speak Russian. You don't speak the Calabrian dialect well enough to know if they are plotting to kill you during the toast. You need ears inside. Alessandro stared at her. The adrenaline and the intimacy of survival were blurring the lines between them. He grabbed the back of her neck and pulled her forehead against his. If you walk into that opera house, Vittoria, there is no coming back. You become a target for life. I was a target the day my father left me, she whispered. Let's finish this. He kissed her then. It wasn't soft. It was desperate, a seal of a blood pact. It tasted of river water and revenge. The next night, the Lyric Opera House was glowing with wealth. Limousines lined the street. The paparazzi were kept at bay by heavy security. Vittoria wore a gown of emerald silk, stolen from a boutique that owed Alessandro protection money. It had a slit up the thigh where a ceramic knife was strapped. Alessandro wore a tuxedo, looking every bit the Prince of Darkness he was rumored to be. They entered separately. Alessandro walked in the front door, flanked by 4 mercenaries, posing as security. The room went silent when he entered. Stefano was on the grand staircase holding a champagne flute. His smile faltered. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Alessandro. Stefano called out, his voice cracking slightly. We thought you were indisposed. I had a swim, Alessandro said, his voice booming through the hall. I found it refreshing. While all eyes were on the confrontation, Vittoria slipped in through the caterer's entrance. She moved through the crowd, a phantom in green. She grabbed a tray of champagne and blended in. She circulated near the private booths where the Russian mobsters and the Calabrian envoys were whispering. She tuned her ears to the frequencies of the room. The bomb is set for midnight, a Russian man whispered to his associate near the bar. When the fireworks start, the stage goes up. Volpe dies, Stefano dies. We take the city. Vittoria's blood ran cold. The Russians weren't backing Stefano. They were playing him. They were going to blow up the entire leadership hierarchy and take over the vacuum. She looked at the clock. 11:45 p.m. She had to warn Alessandro. But he was in the center of the room, surrounded by Stefano's, verbally sparring with the traitor. She couldn't shout. She couldn't shoot. She walked to the orchestra pit. The conductor was preparing for the next piece. Vittoria put down her tray. She walked directly up to the microphone stand meant for the opera singer. The room quieted, confused. Who was this woman? Vittoria tapped the mic. She looked directly at Alessandro across the room. She began to sing. But she didn't sing an aria. She sang a folk song, an old haunting lullaby from the Sicilian hills, La Morte Viene. Death is coming. But she changed the lyrics. She sang in the rare Arborescia dialect, keeping the melody but altering the message. The bear has placed fire beneath the wood. She sang, her voice soaring, haunting and clear. At the stroke of 12 the stage will burn. The wolf must run. The wolf must run. The Russians laughed, thinking it was entertainment. Stefano clapped politely, confused, but Alessandro froze. He understood the code words. Bear meant Russians. Fire meant bomb. 12 meant midnight. He checked his watch. 11:50 p.m. He locked eyes with Vittoria. He gave a microscopic nod. Alessandro suddenly laughed, clapping Stefano on the shoulder. "Stefano, you win. Why fight? Let's drink to your victory. But first, a toast on the balcony, all of us. The fresh air is good for the soul." He was herding them away from the stage. "Why?" Stefano asked, suspicious. "Because I have a gift for you, outside." Alessandro lied. He grabbed Stefano's arm with a grip that could crush bone and pulled him toward the exit. The crowd followed, eager for the spectacle. Vittoria dropped the mic and ran. At 11:59 p.m., the guests were spilling out onto the grand balcony and the street. At 12:00 a.m., the stage inside the Lyric Opera House detonated. The blast blew out the windows. Fire roared through the main hall. If they had stayed inside, they would all be ash. The crowd screamed. Sirens wailed. In the chaos of the street, Alessandro threw Stefano against a limousine. He pressed his gun under Stefano's chin. "You didn't know," Alessandro growled. "You sold out to the Russians and they played you for a fool." Stefano was shaking, sobbing. "I didn't know they promised me control. Where is he?" Vittoria appeared from the smoke, her emerald dress covered in soot. She walked up to Stefano. "My father, Marco, you said you knew where he was." Stefano looked at her, then at Alessandro. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "You think Marco is in Argentina?" Stefano laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "Marco isn't retired, sweetheart. Marco is the one who introduced me to the Russians. He's the broker." Vittoria felt the ground sway. "Where is he?" she screamed, grabbing Stefano's lapels. "He's here," Stefano whispered. "He's watching. He wanted to see you die." A single shot rang out. It didn't come from Alessandro. It came from a sniper on the rooftop across the street. Stefano's head snapped back. He crumpled to the pavement, dead. Silenced before he could give up the location. Alessandro grabbed Vittoria and shoved her into the back of the limousine. "Go, driver, go." The war for Chicago lasted 3 days. With the Russian betrayal exposed, the other families rallied behind Alessandro. The Russians were purged from the city in a brutal wave of violence. But the victory felt hollow. Vittoria was a ghost in the penthouse again. She spent her hours staring at the city waiting. Her father was here, the architect of her misery. On the 4th day, a package arrived at the penthouse. It had cleared security because it bore the seal of the Vatican, a trusted courier service. Inside was a phone. It rang immediately. Alessandro put it on speaker. "Hello, Vittoria," a voice said. Smooth, cultured, familiar. Vittoria stopped breathing. It was him. Marco. "Papa?" She whispered, her voice trembling. "You've grown up," Marco said. "You're clever. Like me. That singing trick at the opera, brilliant. I was almost proud." "You tried to kill me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You left me with nothing. You let me believe you were dead." "I did what was necessary to survive," Marco said coldly. "And now I am offering you a way out. Alessandro is a sinking ship, Vittoria. Come to me. I'm at the private airfield in Gary, Indiana. My plane leaves in an hour. Come with me, and you can live like a queen in Europe. And if I don't, then you stay with the wolf, and eventually he will eat you. It's what they do. The line went dead. Alessandro looked at her. He placed his gun on the table between them. "You can go," he said quietly. "He's your father." Vittoria picked up the gun. She checked the chamber. It was loaded. "He's not my father," she said, her voice turning into steel. "He's just a man who knows too much." She looked at Alessandro. "Drive." They arrived at the airfield under the cover of a thunderstorm. The private jet was engines spooling ready for takeoff. Marco stood by the stairs of the plane, flanked by 2 bodyguards. He looked older, greyer, but he wore a suit that cost more than the house he had raised her in. Alessandro and Vittoria stepped out of the car. Alessandro held his hands up, showing he was unarmed. Vittoria walked forward, her hands in her coat pockets. "Vittoria." Marco smiled, opening his arms. "You came to your senses. I came for the truth," she said, stopping 10 feet away. "Did you love me? Or was I just another asset?" Marco lowered his arms. He sighed, looking disappointed. "Love is a liability, sweetie. I protected you by leaving, and now I'm offering you the world. Get on the plane." "No," she said. Marco's face hardened. He snapped his fingers. His bodyguards raised their weapons toward Alessandro. "Then I suppose I have to cut my loose ends. Goodbye, Mr. Volpe." "Wait!" Vittoria screamed. She pulled the gun from her pocket. But she didn't aim it at the guards. She aimed it at her father. Marco laughed. "You won't shoot me, Vittoria. You're my blood. You're a Corvese. We are survivors, not killers." "I'm not a Corvese anymore," she said, her hand steady. "I'm a Volpe." She didn't shoot him in the chest. She wasn't a murderer. She shot him in the leg. Marco screamed and fell to the tarmac. At the sound of the shot, Alessandro moved. He drew a hidden backup pistol from his ankle holster and dropped both bodyguards with 2 clean shots before they could react to the shock of the daughter shooting the father. Vittoria walked over to where her father lay writhing on the ground. She kicked the gun away from his hand. "You're not going to Europe, Papa," she said, looking down at him. "You're going to prison. I called the feds on the way here. I gave them the ledger. I gave them the bond numbers. They'll be here in 5 minutes." Marco looked up at her with hatred. "You rat! You traitor!" "I learned from the best," she said. Sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights cut through the rain. Alessandro walked up beside her. He took the gun from her hand gently. "Let's go. My lawyers will handle the feds. You don't need to be here when they cuff him." Vittoria turned her back on her father. She didn't look back. 6 months had passed since the asphalt of the Gary, Indiana airfield was stained with the blood of the past. The winter had melted into a humid, heavy Chicago summer, the kind that made the city sweat and tempers flare. But inside the obsidian room, the air was perfectly chilled, scented with aged mahogany, expensive cologne, and the metallic tang of fear. It was a full circle. The same private dining room where Irene Corvese had once trembled while holding a water pitcher was now the staging ground for the most significant underworld summit of the decade. Alessandro Volpe sat at the head of the table. He looked different. The frantic energy of a man hunted was gone, replaced by the heavy gravitational pull of a man who owned the hunt. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo. His posture relaxed, a glass of 1982 Brunello resting near his hand. But the eyes of the men at the table weren't on him. To his right sat a woman who looked nothing like the waitress named Bella. Vittoria wore a tailored suit of white silk that seemed to glow in the dim light, a stark contrast to the shadows of the room. Her dark hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders, and around her throat was a choker of diamonds that had once belonged to the Romanovs, a gift from Alessandro for their first-month anniversary of taking the city. Across from them sat Don Pietro, the butcher, Genovese, the acting head of the New York 5 families, and his consigliere, a man named Lucas. Pietro was a dinosaur, a man of 60, with a neck as thick as a tree trunk and a world view that hadn't evolved since 1950. He had come to Chicago to challenge the Volpe claim on the mid-Atlantic shipping routes. "The percentages are unacceptable," Pietro grunted, pushing the contract away with a hand covered in liver spots and gold rings. He didn't look at Alessandro. He looked past him. And he certainly didn't look at Vittoria. To him, she was decoration, a mistress allowed to sit at the big table to keep the boss happy. "The percentages are fair, Pietro," Alessandro said, his voice smooth like velvet over gravel. 60-40. I control the ports. You control the unions. It's the standard rate. Standard for a man who commands respect, Pietro sneered. He leaned forward, picking up his wine glass. "But I hear things, Alessandro. I hear your house is built on sand. I hear you let outsiders run your books. I hear you take counsel from—" He flicked a dismissive hand toward Vittoria. "The help." The room went dead silent. Alessandro's bodyguards, Rocco's replacements, tensed by the door. Alessandro's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. He started to reach for the gun, holstered beneath the table. Vittoria placed a hand on Alessandro's forearm. A gentle, restraining touch. Alessandro paused. He looked at her. She offered him a small, cold smile. "Let me," the look said. Vittoria stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor was the only noise in the room. She walked slowly around the table. She picked up the crystal decanter of wine. Pietro watched her with a leering, patronizing grin. "See, she knows her place. More wine, sweetheart." Vittoria stopped behind Pietro's chair. She didn't pour the wine. She leaned down her lips, inches from his ear. "You are mistaken, Don Pietro," she whispered in English. "I'm not here to serve you. I'm here to save you." Pietro laughed, a wet, rasping sound. He turned to his consigliere Lucas and switched languages. He began to speak in a hyper-specific, antiquated dialect of Sicilian Siculish, mixed with code words used only by the innermost circle of the New York Commission. It was a language designed to be impenetrable to the FBI, to outsiders, and certainly to former waitresses from Ohio. "Lucane ka abaya assai muzika picca," Pietro muttered to Lucas, snickering. "Tell the boys outside to prep the car. We kill the wolf tonight. The girl, we take her with us. She looks like she knows how to be useful on her knees." Alessandro's hand tightened on his glass. He understood Italian, but this dialect was thick, slurred, and riddled with slang he couldn't pass fast enough. He looked at Vittoria, waiting for the translation. Vittoria's face was a mask of stone. She walked back to her seat, but she didn't sit. She stood at the right hand of the king. "Alessandro," she said clearly, "Don Pietro just ordered his men to kill you. He intends to kidnap me." Pietro's face went white. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the table, spilling blood-red wine across the white linen. "She lies," Pietro shouted in English, standing up. "She doesn't know what she's hearing. It's nonsense." Vittoria switched instantly. She didn't speak English. She didn't speak standard Italian. She spoke Pietro's dialect, the exact localized slang of his childhood neighborhood in Palermo. "You speak of dogs barking, Pietro." Her voice rang out, guttural and perfect, carrying the cadence of a street boss. "But you are the old dog here. You think because I poured water in this room 6 months ago that I am deaf. I learned the old laws before you were stealing hubcaps in Queens. She took a step forward, and for the first time the massive Don flinched. You want to take me with you, she continued, her voice dropping to a terrifying hiss. Let us discuss what I know about you. I know about the skimming operation in the Jersey waste management sector. I know you are stealing from your own commission. And I know about the apartment in the Bronx, the one on Arthur Avenue. Does your wife know about the 19-year-old dancer you keep there, or should I call her? I have the number memorized. Pietro looked at his consigliere. Lucas was trembling. She knows the codes, Lucas whispered, terrified. She knows everything. Vittoria picked up the contract from the table. She slid it across the wine-stained cloth until it rested in front of the shaking Don. The deal has changed, Vittoria said, switching back to cool corporate English. It is no longer 60-40. It is 70-30, in our favor. And you will retire, Pietro, tonight. You will sign this, you will go back to New York, and you will pass the leadership to your nephew, who is smarter and less talkative. Pietro looked at Alessandro. The Wolf of Chicago was leaning back in his chair, watching the scene with a look of pure, unadulterated pride. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. You heard the lady, Alessandro said, gesturing to the pen. And I would hurry. My wife gets impatient when she's hungry. Wife. The word hung in the air. They hadn't announced it. They hadn't had a ceremony. But in that moment, the title was bestowed. Pietro Genovese, the butcher of New York, looked at the pen. He looked at the gun bulges in the jackets of the guards by the door. He looked at the woman in white, who held his life, his reputation, and his secrets in her hands. He picked up the pen. His hand shook as he scrawled his signature. A wise choice, Vittoria said. She snapped her fingers. A waiter appeared from the shadows, a young man nervous, sweating. Bring a fresh glass for the Don, Vittoria commanded, and clean up this mess. Pietro drank the wine in one gulp, stood up, and fled the room with his tail between his legs. The door clicked shut, leaving Alessandro and Vittoria alone in the silence of the obsidian room. Alessandro stood up and walked to her. He didn't care about the wine spilled on the table. He lifted her onto the edge of the mahogany surface, stepping between her legs. You were ruthless, he murmured, his hands resting on her waist. 70-30. You're going to bankrupt him. He insulted my husband, Vittoria said, her eyes flashing. He got off easy. Alessandro laughed, a true, deep sound that he hadn't made in years. He rested his forehead against hers. Do you remember the first night, right over there in the corner? You were wearing that terrible uniform. I remember you were ready to shoot everyone, she countered, running her fingers through his hair. I saved you then, too. You saved me in every way a man can be saved, Alessandro whispered. He pulled back to look at her. The feds transferred your father to a supermax in Colorado today. He'll never see the sky again. Vittoria paused. The memory of her father, the architect, still stung, but it was a distant pain now, like an old scar. She had chosen her family. She had chosen the wolf. Good, she said softly. Let him rot. I have a kingdom to run. Alessandro kissed her. It was a kiss of equals. There was no fear left in Vittoria Corvese. The waitress was dead. The translator was retired. The queen was alive. As they broke the kiss, Alessandro poured 2 fresh glasses of the Brunello. He handed one to her. To the deal, he asked. Vittoria swirled the wine, watching the light catch the deep red liquid. She looked at the empty chair where the Don had sat, then back to the man, who would burn the world down for her. "No," she said, clinking her glass against his, "to the language of silence. Because now, nobody needs to say a word. They already know who we are." They drank. Outside the city of Chicago twinkled a sprawling, chaotic, beautiful mess, and for the first time in history, it belonged entirely to them. And that is how a simple waitress toppled a crime syndicate and stole the heart of the most dangerous man in the city. It turns out the most powerful weapon isn't a gun. It's a voice that knows exactly what to say and when to say it. Vittoria didn't just translate languages, she translated power. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, romance, and mafia justice, please destroy that like button. It helps the channel so much. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were Vittoria? Would you have forgiven your father? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.